It is so insanely hot in here. Hi. For those of you on Spotify, this episode will seem pretty much the same. For those of you on SoundCloud, likewise. However, for those of you on YouTube, hello. Hey, you are seeing my face in a podcast for the first time, which is pretty cool and I'm pretty excited about. So, for today's episode, we got to talk about a subject that I actually studied a lot in college, and that's classical music. Before I say anything more, I'm Sidelbia, this is Sidelbia Snippets, and let's dive right into this episode about classical music. So before we get into the interview for this podcast episode, I want to talk a little bit about one of my favorite all-time historical figures, Hildegard von Bingen, also called Hildegard of Bingen because she was from Bingen, and that's how names worked in the early 1000s, which is when she's from. Hildegard von Bingen was a medieval composer, and I honestly could go on forever about her. If you want to know a little bit more than the things I say in this podcast episode, there's a great article on The New Yorker by Alex Ross, who is incredibly knowledgeable when it comes to classical music and just the classical world in general. So definitely go check that out. And you're also going to hear more about just classical music in general in this interview with Claire, who's the guest for this episode, is so insanely knowledgeable. I can't wait for you all to hear what she has to say. But let's talk a little bit about Hildegard von Bingen, because she is the mother of classical music. She invented a genre of music or a style of performance called liturgical drama. Now, back when she was making music, a lot of music and a lot of written music that wasn't being commissioned for a specific reason was religious. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this with Claire. Claire mentions it in our interview together. But I just wanted to say that now. So one of the things that makes Hildegard so impressive was the fact she was writing and creating music that no one had ever heard before. The rumor was that she would have hallucinations, but because it was back then, they were seen as being signs from God, and she would take those visions and would translate them into music, hence the liturgical dramas, where you had music and often a visual component with the music, which is kind of appropriate that this is our first episode with a camera and we're talking about Hildegard von Bingen. Now, she was so talented as a musician and composer that genuinely men of the time could not believe that she as a woman was writing such great music. So there were a lot of rumors that either her music was getting secretly written by a man or that God himself was somehow aiding her and giving her divine powers to create music. How she learned was also an interesting thing to mention, in that she was taught by another woman at the nunnery that she was in, because originally it was a little taboo in different parts of Europe for women to learn music. Some places were more okay with it than others. Italy was one of those places where there was a wider range of people who knew music theory and understood music theory, or the medieval version of music theory, at least. So the woman that taught her was Italian. Anyways, Hildegard went on to not only be a prolific composer, she was also prolific in the church and ended up gaining a lot of power and influence. And even ended up touring with her music. She was an incredibly impressive person. And the reason, or one of the main reasons, she even ended up in the nunnery in the first place was because she was the 10th child of her family. She came from a pretty wealthy family, so there wasn't the struggle for money. But even in a privileged situation, being number 10 is not the easiest place to be. So, to the nunnery she went. And she was, interestingly enough, fine with that. I don't want to get into any speculations, but I do have my personal theories, as I'm sure we all do. And she started learning music and started collaborating with other people in the nunnery and started learning about classical music and sacred music and learning how she could take her visions and turn them into an auditory spectacle for the world to see. And I truly believe that she is the origins of a lot of the classical composers that would come later, such as Beethoven, Mozart, Bach, all names that you are going to hear in our conversation with Claire, I promise. And speaking of Claire, I'm keeping this intro short because truly, Claire is probably one of the most knowledgeable guests we've ever had on this show. I was awestruck by what she had to say, and I am so excited to share it with all of you, and I am almost definitely going to be inviting her back for a part 2. I felt so bad having to cut her off when I did. Here is Claire, and here's our interview. Well, we can start with just introducing yourself.
Yeah, that would be
telling
good.
a little bit about your background in both history and in music, and we can get into how
Great.
those intersect later if you want, or bring them
Oh
up.
yeah, I'll
It's pretty free form.
absolutely. I'll just give my general synopsis of myself. So, my name is Claire McLeod Hill. I am a graduate student at the University of Edinburgh. I do this remotely because I live in Los Angeles and I work in Los Angeles, in the industry, in the entertainment industry. So I deal with a lot of different musicians and rock bands and classical music and more EDM, and I mean you name it. Like if it's a type of music, I deal with it. Right now I perform sometimes with Green Jello, the legendary punk rock band that started Tool. Me being out here in Los Angeles is kind of an accumulation of my entire life, which I grew up singing, dancing, being involved in all different kinds of arts since I was born. I started playing, I played some instruments growing up. When I got into the 6th grade, I started playing French horn and trumpet. I love brass music, or all brass instruments. And I really enjoyed French horn and trumpet. So I played that very seriously. I was on track to be drum major and first chair as a sophomore. We had a very prestigious band program. I was very humbled to be able to do that. I went to a drum major academy, learned how to conduct. I obviously know how to read and write music. So I felt like I always excelled in more of I don't know, a bigger picture. So I decided that I was going to take a break from being really super into playing music and on my instruments and trying to focus on being a professional musician and doing all this stuff and being in the all state band and blah, blah, blah. And I left high school and I went to university after my freshman year because I hated high school and I was over it and I wanted to go to university, and I passed the test. And so I could do that at the same time as getting my online diploma. So I was basically doubling up, going to college and high school at the same time. So when I got there, I was extremely involved in the theater department. I still was very involved in music and music theater and all of those sorts of things, doing conservatories at lots of different universities like UCLA and TCU, I mean, all over the place and in the country. And just continuing to expand my musical knowledge, especially regarding in a musical theater sense, and then doing my own research on my own time, because obviously I've always enjoyed classical music. I've always enjoyed opera. I've always enjoyed jazz. I've always enjoyed all different kinds of music, truly. I got my undergrad in history and minor in anthropology. And then now I'm obviously in graduate school. I'm studying medieval history, specifically in Europe. And I'm looking at a lot of different things. I won't go off too far into my thesis because it doesn't really have to do with this topic. But anyways, I'm someone that really has studied this and looked into this. I mean, my entire life, and enjoyed learning about the history of music my whole life. And okay, I'm trying to think. Was that enough about myself? Should I just get back into this,
no,
or do you want me to talk about
that
my
was
company and
amazing.
stuff? I should probably talk about my company too.
Yeah,
Let me talk about my
we
company
can.
too.
We'll
Yeah.
also get into that at the end. I always make sure to give
Yeah.
whoever I'm interviewing a point of time just to do
Okay,
self-promotion
cool.
stuff.
Perfect.
I did wanted to ask a little bit, so backtracking,
Yeah,
because a lot of the listeners aren't musicians. I studied music composition and history in college, so, like as well. So I studied a lot of classical, but that's not the case for the listeners. So I wanted to just ask, how would you define classical music? And especially to someone who's maybe just getting into it, and this is the episode they're listening to just to learn a little
great.
bit of something.
Okay, so this is really important. When you say classical music, people have a lot of different things in their head. Us in the Western world, we have a certain tradition of classical composers that have been canonized in like a linear trajectory. And it there's classical music for quote unquote classical music for lots of different cultures and societies. I mean, you have like Asian, like Japanese, Chinese, Vietnamese, and you name it. You have all different kinds of classical music within those traditions. That also have, our classical music is, inseparable from our religious history, the same way that like Jewish classical music is inseparable for that. Same way that Indian classical music is very much, so we start off, I feel like, really looking at sacred music. Sacred music is the first music ever, is what we really try. We needed something beyond just the realm of normal everyday speech to be able to communicate something higher. And we all know that music has certain vibrations and can do, have certain moving powers within us that speech and language don't necessarily have by themselves. Not saying that speech and language doesn't have it, but it's basically characterized by its complexity and its formality and in its structure. Where just like if you are writing a paper, well, you can write a paper, but if you're going to write an academic paper, you're going to need to structure it in an MLA or Chicago format. You need to have an annotated bibliography or a footnotes. Like you have to have certain things within the confines and structures of this for it to classify to be an academic paper. So since the 19th century, at least, it's been a written tradition. I mean, obviously, people were writing sheet music far before that, but it's just like I said, it was very hard for people to be able to have access to vast amounts of sheet music before that was like, you know, available on an industrial scale. With the advent of the printing press and that being obviously made better and technology's improving, books were being able to be, mass produced, different things. As it gets to that point, people have more and more access to the sheet music, which is very important, but very much musicians are relying on ear for a lot of this, which is why harmony is so important and being able to have that clarity. I mean, you didn't even necessarily have to be able to hear the music. You just had to be able to understand like I mean, look at Beethoven. Just understanding like the different like vibrations and like how he like felt that. Like he couldn't even hear by the time he was, done like as a composer. Like, he had gone almost completely deaf. But he remembered what those vibrations and different things felt like to him. So he knew what it sounded like. And so he could, replicate that. So it's very important with classical music to be able to kind of put all that in your head. Okay. So obviously the patronage of classical music is rooted in sacred music and rooted in music of the courts, because obviously most music that wasn't just like folk music and different things that you would hear was commissioned for certain reasons. For like ancient Greece and Rome, you had obviously like golden periods where drama and music and the arts and poetry and everything was really encouraged, was supported by the state, was commissioned by the government, and was viewed to be something that was very integral to society. Same thing. When you look at the Carolingian Empire, and that's around the time of, I would say, like 800 AD. So you're getting into the medieval period. We've gone through the collapse of the Roman Empire, and now we start to have the structure of medieval courts come up. So when you have medieval courts, you need entertainment. And so the uh, different musical centers that would exist at these different abbeys and churches, um, were basically increasing and increasing because there became more and more demand for a varied library of sacred music, because there's lots of different renditions and ways that you can sing the same kind of hymns or structure things, as far as like a liturgical sense goes. So there's a want and need for liturgical music and for sacred music. And in addition to that, there's a want and a need for music to be able to be performed in court. So the Renaissance also brought about a lot of advancement to classical music in the sense that we understand it today, because they built off like harmonic principles and things that were developed by all these incredible, monks and sacred musicians, and especially in England and in France. That really developed a harmonic tradition, as we understand like chanting traditions. Now, this is different than sacred music in the East. There is a very rich history of Byzantine liturgical sacred music, which is written in a different notation at a different scale than Western music. So if you go to an Orthodox Christian church versus a Catholic Christian church, they will be similar, but you will not necessarily recognize some of the sounds that you're hearing. Some things, whenever you, especially if you are in like an Antiochian or a Middle Eastern Orthodox church, you will hear some things to the Western ear that might sound like clashing or not melodious in the same way that, Handel's Messiah might be, but it's extremely beautiful and resonates in a different way. So I would also like to just like take a little bit of time to talk about that and just mention that, even though I'm trying to focus mostly on Western classical music and the influence of that, the great era of classical music, like it came to an end. It came to the end at like basically the end of like, I mean, the 20th century. Like it was just done. Like no one was
So
really doing it.
what are your thoughts on then composers like Debussy or Ravel that are sort of considered more contemporary?
Yeah, so I would say like I love Debussy. Like I think he's great. And there's a lot of amazing, really contemporary composers. Like I would also say like I would honestly put Eric Whitacre, like if you know Eric Whitacre, up there. Like he's very like this is now. Like this man is composing now, and I think that his compositions are very much in line with the tradition. And I think that it's really hard to say like when do we cut this off? Like when do we say this isn't it anymore? And I don't necessarily think that I'm the person to really make that argument. But the Baroque period is really what saw the standardization of classical music. The Baroque period was like the height. This is like, okay, we've been building up to this point. This is what this tradition is. In the same way that like you had certain developments that went into developing like fine cuisine and fine dining and hot cuisine, and all of that was kind of built up by like these needs for like these really extravagant lush banquets, which obviously started out in like an ancient world and then got more formalized in the medieval period, where it wasn't just kind of like a free-for-all banquet. We got all these kind of we got culture around it. We got rules and regulations and certain things done. I mean, we like literally had certain utensils for certain things that were supposed to be held in certain ways, and you had to sit in a certain way and you had to say certain things. I mean, it becomes like, and servers are serving things in certain ways, so it's very specific and detailed. And that's kind of like where we get into the place, because with the Baroque period, because we have Bach, and Bach is literally like the end all be all for classical music. Like I don't give a shit what anybody says, you cannot argue with that. You really can't. Like without Bach, without his musical compositions, without his brilliance, you do not have the rest of classical music. You just don't. And so this is also around the time in which, I mean, if you listen to the passions, either one of them, which Bach had multiple passions that were created. We only have two in entire existence, and one that's like in partial existence. But the two that are entire and are kept in their entirety are Saint John the Passion and Saint Matthew the Passion. So basically, these are, as we know, the gospel stories. Western classical music is obviously extremely influenced by Christian literature, because most of the time, this, especially in the Baroque period and these early periods, has been written for sacred purposes, the same way that all art was for sacred purposes. You did not get kind of this, movement to have art and music not be for sacred purposes until like a little bit later. Obviously the Renaissance had an influence on that with the humanism and the kind of going back to their classical roots. The same way we see that again, with neoclassical things. Wagner is a great example of this. Wagner is someone who took literally, I mean, I can't even think right now of anything to do with Wagner that has to do with Christianity. It's like all Germanic paganism. So it's like, obviously there's a point that classical music is not about Christianity anymore, but at this time it is. So if you look at the passions that are done by Bach, the way that these chorulistic compositions are done are very, very reflective of how opera is going to develop, because opera is kind of like a very interesting subset of the genre of classical music, because it's something that really has an entire sort of culture built around it that even to today is something that I feel like is viewed as very exclusive.
And so I wanted to just ask if you had any advice you would give for a young historian, someone who loves music history, starting off, what should they look into? Where should they start? And then after that, I would ask you to please talk about your amazing company and any
Oh
music you
yeah,
have coming
for
up or
sure.
anything like that.
If you want to try to figure out anything about the history of music, trying to connect the dots for yourself, putting things together, you just have to do your own research. You have to look into the music yourself. I mean, for instance, I was trying to understand the evolution of American folk music, and I love English folk rock. So I was listening to one of my favorite English folk rock bands, Steel Eye Span, and I heard this song called Blackjack Davy. And this is years ago. It was a great song. Then I was in this class on American, like Appalachian and Ozark folk music. And we were listening to a recording from the early 1900s of this song called like Gypsum Navy. And I was like, what the hell? And literally, they had just forgotten the words. Like these hillbillies were trying to remember this old English song that I'm sure that's been passed down. And through the weird, translation playing telephone with getting this song to America, it's the same song, but it's just been changed ever so slightly. And that's what we see. You have different things like, the little different pieces of Bach and different, inventions and different chords and things that come up over and over and over again and are just done in different ways. And if you start studying things and if you start at the beginning and really try to have a general sense, you don't have to be bogged down by all the specifics and this and that and whatever, because it can get really overwhelming. Music theory and history can get really overwhelming. What you need to focus on is like really understanding the connections. Like if you want to understand why music is where it's at today and why it's splintered in the way that it has and why there's so many different things that are still so unexplored, and so many different fusions that we haven't even really been able to cross over. I mean, just it's such an untapped territory and realm. There's so much less to discover. And so I would just say you really just need to sit down and, I mean, obviously Wikipedia is great, but like get on Google Scholar. Like a lot of things on Google Scholar are free, guys. If you're a university student, you have access to all of the university's documents. If you're a physicist, you can still read a document on, Shakespeare plays in the 18th century. Like you're not barred from reading that. So just get on there, do some reading. The last thing I'll say is on my company. I run a company called Civilized Chaos LLC. We deal with entertainment and event production and curation. I have events all the time. I work very intimately with a lot of other people to try to collaborate to do different things. Every single Monday, there's Dirty Mondays, which is the most incredible Italian rock and roll party of all time. It started in Milan. It's absolutely legendary. All you have to do is RSVP with my name, and you get in free with a shot. It's great. Please come hear some incredible up and coming rock bands. It's usually right off Hollywood Boulevard at Madam, Siam. And every Monday, sometimes it'll be a different place, but just look on the Dirty Mondays Instagram page, RSVP. You've got that. Civilized Chaos has our second event called Sunday Dinners, which was the incredible idea of my friend and business partner, Kayla, which is a performance art event that is centered around featuring a local chef or restaurant, highlighting some incredible local cuisine, as well as local artists and musicians, and also having an element of networking and collaboration in this, because it is a ticketed event that we do invite only first. And then if we have extra tickets left to sell, then we sell. And so everyone there is, involved in something in some way that you're probably interested in and should be talking to. And so obviously you get the one that we're doing in October is entirely Latin themed. We're doing it in La Nea in Santa Monica, which is an incredible mezcal and tequila bar right in the middle of Santa Monica, like 2 minutes from the beach. And we're going to you can make your own tortillas or a taco bar. It's going to be all Latin performances, which is going to be incredible because there is obviously a wealth of Latin performers here in Los Angeles that are incredibly talented. So we want to give them some featured time in one of our events. So you guys, please check out the Civilized Chaos Instagram page. We also have a website. All the information for that will be there.
I'll make sure to put any links in the description below.
Thank you, honey. So. Absolutely. And just feel free if you guys are interested, or you want to have questions, or you want to talk about something, or you want book recommendations or music recommendations. I'm always giving those out. I put them on my Instagram often, but feel free to send me an email as well. And I'd be happy to explain more about anything. I'm pretty easy to find and get a hold of for the most part. So.
And I actually participated in one of the Civilized Chaos open mics, and it was a really fun experience. So seriously, you all should go check out that company.
Absolutely. We do lots of different things. The open mic series was a lot of fun. We actually put that on hold for now just because it was the person I was doing it with has just gotten really busy with his own stuff. It's very hard for me to run by myself. So yeah, if you guys also are interested in bringing back the open mic series, let me know. I definitely would like to do that, but I'm going to need more than just myself to do that. So that's another thing. If you guys are interested or have any ideas for events or collaboration, please reach out to me. I'm always looking to do new things and to build the company and grow. So yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad that you were able to come to one of those. You were incredible. Sadie's an incredible musician, as you guys obviously know, and I'm really, really lucky to be able to be on the podcast today. I really appreciate her having me on to talk. It's great.
Thank you so much for coming on, and we'll text about information and stuff. Thank you so much, Claire, for coming on. I told you guys she knows her stuff. Well, this is it. We've made it to the end of our first ever video podcast. Is it still a podcast if it's on video? Is it just a video essay? I don't know. Once again, for those of you on Spotify and SoundCloud, it's going to sound the same. The editing just might be a little bit different, as I am trying to figure out how to edit audio and video at the same time, and that's a whole thing for another day. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. If you would like to hear more about this topic, about classical music, which is or European classical music, I guess, is kind of what we focused on the most. It's one of those things I love. I love to talk about it. I realized I haven't been looking at the camera this whole time. I'm getting used to these things. I love talking about this stuff and would love to do more episodes in this genre, in this vein, in this world. And so if you would like to see more like this, let me know. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. You guys know the drill. Follow me on social media and follow Claire on social media. I'm sure she'll appreciate it. Further announcements, I am planning on starting a bonus content series called Sedelbia Snaps. That was not just a throwaway comment in the interview, if I left that part in. So if that's going to be more of a free form thing. It's not going to be as structured as these episodes. So for that, I'll be bringing friends on, guests, letting people info dump, letting, kind of whatever happens, maybe talking a little bit more about myself than I do in these episodes. Also, I am always looking for more guests. So if you know someone who is passionate about music history, has some kind of qualifications, let me know. Send me a DM on social media or an email if you have my email. I would love to potentially meet with them, see if they are right for our show. Once again, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed and have a great day and keep listening to music. All right. Bye.